Hello everyone, the webinar will begin in just a moment. Welcome everyone to today's Research Roundtable on epilepsy in pregnancy. This has been one of our most requested webinar topics, and today we have a brilliant lineup of speakers. We'll first hear from Epilepsy Research UK supporter and blogger Faye, who lives with epilepsy, and then we'll hear from Dr. Rebecca Bromley and Kim Morley, who work in the field of epilepsy in pregnancy, both clinically and through research. All of today's speakers have contributed to our research blog this month, so if you're interested in hearing more, we'll be sharing the link to the research blog in the chat. And just before we begin, the UK Epilepsy Priority Setting Partnership is a national survey collating the views of the entire epilepsy community, including healthcare professionals, those affected by epilepsy, including families, friends, carers, people sadly bereaved by epilepsy, and people who work for epilepsy organisations. We have had a brilliant response to the survey so far, but we have had a limited response from men, ethnic minorities, people aged 25 and under and those aged 65 and over, and healthcare professionals working in paediatrics and psychology. So why not share the survey with anyone in your networks who may be willing to take part, and of course, take part in the survey yourself if you haven't done so already. 5 minutes is all it takes for you to make a huge difference this year and help shape the future of research into epilepsy. So let's drive change in 2022, and you can take the UK Epilepsy PSP survey on the link in the chat and in the information below this video. Thanks. So for now, let's get on with the webinar, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Faye. Faye will discuss how she began blogging to provide information and support for women with epilepsy, and will also speak about her experiences as a key influencer on the valproate stakeholders network. So Faye, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you. Hi guys. For those of you that don't know me, I was diagnosed with epilepsy when I was 7 years old. It obviously shaped my childhood and my teenage years, but by the time I got into adulthood and got married and began to think about starting my own family, I thought I knew everything there was to know about being a person with epilepsy. However, falling pregnant it was a curveball. I'd been seizure-free at that point for many, many years. And I fell pregnant. I started to suffer with sickness on a very regular basis. And very early on in my pregnancy, before I'd even hit the 12-week mark, my seizures began to return. This was a bit of a shock for me. I had no idea that that would happen. We had no reason to believe it would happen. And I started to look around online for support and some help, and what I was finding was there wasn't very much out there for me. There was lots of stories about epilepsy and pregnancy and it all being wonderful and looking at it through rose-tinted glasses, which for a lot of people it is, and I totally understand that. But when you feel that unwell and that isolated, it's quite a scary place to be, that nobody else is saying to you, you know what, you're not alone. So I had a conversation with a friend and decided that I was going to start blogging about my experiences, honestly not believing for 1 second that anybody other than my friends and family would humour me and read it. It introduced me to the world of Twitter. I wasn't a massive Twitter user at that point, but it helped to get the blog out there. Actually, what I found was very quickly the response to the blog was absolutely phenomenal. I started off with just providing an email address if anyone wanted to get into contact, and I quickly found that that wasn't actually enough, that I had been right, that if I felt this way, there was definitely other women out there who felt the same. And I have to say, it wasn't just the expectant mums. I had people's partners messaging in saying, how do I help my wife, my girlfriend? They just didn't know where to go with it. So from that, I grew a support group on Facebook, and actually that is pretty much self-sufficient up to today. We've got well over 1,000 members from all around the world who can help each other out. And actually, sometimes it's just that voice saying, you're not on your own. But the blogging has been a labour of love, because at times it's meant laying myself and my family bare and being very honest about our journey. But I think that's what works well with it, and that's why people are drawn towards the support group, because they know that I will always be as honest as I can. I don't necessarily have the answers, but I can give you my experiences, and if I don't know, I can always signpost you to somewhere that can help you. My little boy is now almost 7. And what I found over the years is that the blogging has become less of a focus as Noah's grown. But what I have found is that a lot more of my time is spent doing advocacy work and being a voice for women with epilepsy in general, but more so in pregnancy. What I'm doing is remembering how vulnerable I felt and knowing that I needed someone to shout a bit louder for me. One of the things I've worked on that has taken up a lot of my time is the valproate stakeholders network. It's been many, many years in the work before I joined it, and I've been on it now for a few years, and actually seeing the work that's being done to make sure that no babies are harmed from valproate has been incredible. It's been a long process. It's very interesting. But even today, I still get messages from women who are on valproate and are seeking advice. But what's amazing now is that the advice is there, that they are conversations that are being had, and it means that we are moving forward in terms of research. So as much as, yes, you may not see as much from me in writing, there's definitely a lot more going on behind the scenes, because I'm very passionate now about making sure that women get all the information to make informed choices going forward.
Thank you so much, Faye. That was such a brilliant synopsis, and some of the things you said, I know a lot of people watching at home will resonate. When you spoke about pregnancy coming as a curveball and feeling unwell and isolated, and there must have been so many other women out there feeling exactly the same way as you were. And I loved some of your particularly popular blog posts. I know you spoke about obviously people's partners and husbands coming to you for insight and advice, and your own husband has contributed to the blog, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has actually. I think he did 2 posts back to back quite early on when Noah was young, and they turned out to be 2 of the most popular ones I've ever published. Because I think this is the thing, funnily enough, you saying about men being underrepresented, actually Chris speaking out drew in men to that, because I don't think men seek out the advice and help as readily maybe as women will. And I think that was a really powerful thing. And yeah, he did really, really well to share so openly his side of it.
Brilliant. And your work with the valproate stakeholders network, what's been the highlight of that work?
Do you know what? It's seeing the change for me. It really has. At times it's felt very slow, but when I think back to my own experience, I was taken off of valproate in my early 20s when I met my now husband. There was no real conversation around it, just that was what my epilepsy nurse at the time decided to do. Whereas now that conversation is had, and you've got the likes of Kim who work fantastically, to give women all that information. And I think seeing that the use of valproate is reduced, but it's also taking the women's journey into account, I think it's fantastic progress. And it's something that 7 years ago, I don't think I could have imagined we'd be sat here today having that conversation.
Yes, so much progress in 7 years, and a lot of progress still to come, but in such a better place than things were. Well, thank you so much, Faye, for taking the time to speak. We're going to bring you back at the end to answer some questions that have been sent in. But for now, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Last week, we spoke with Dr. Rebecca Bromley, who is a clinical psychologist in neuropsychology at the University of Manchester and a member of Epilepsy Research UK's Scientific Advisory Committee. Dr. Bromley's Epilepsy Research UK funded research led to key changes in policy and clinical practice relating to prescription medication for women with epilepsy. And Dr. Bromley discussed her research in this area. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for joining us last week.
Hello everyone. I'm going to talk to you in the next kind of few minutes around what's going on in research in the UK to help improve outcomes for children born to women with epilepsy. So to start, why is it important that we study this? Well, understanding child health and development following exposure in the womb to anti-seizure medications is really important. Knowing if certain medications are safer or are associated with higher levels of risk helps people who are planning to become pregnant, along with their doctors, plan their treatment appropriately. The consequences of not having information to be able to inform preconception care is that more children may be exposed in the womb to potentially higher risk anti-seizure medications, or that people of childbearing potential or who are pregnant choose not to use their medications correctly because they're worried that they can't be reassured about any potential impact on their developing child. And unfortunately, we've got a lot of work to do still. The UK medicines regulator just in January last year did a large review and concluded that there's a lot of missing very important information that should be available to women and their healthcare professionals to plan pregnancies safely. So taking a step back just to kind of think a little bit about ways that we can study the offspring born to people who have epilepsy. So we have hospital-based studies. These are the studies that maybe most of you are kind of most familiar with, in that this is where women who go to a particular clinic, for example, will be approached about participation in a study. It may be one hospital, or it may be a few hospitals working together. We also have pregnancy registers, which there are a number of international pregnancy and epilepsy registers whereby women in a particular country or group of countries would opt in, usually when they're pregnant, and their children would be followed up until birth to find out how they're doing. We also have adverse event reporting, which is the cornerstone of pharmacovigilance, which is undertaken by the healthcare and medicine regulators in particular countries and the pharmaceutical companies that make these products. And finally, we have what we call secondary use data, so research that's done on data that's collected routinely through healthcare practices. So for example, these large databases may link maternity outcome records to pharmacy records and investigate child exposure and longer term outcomes that way. And there are a number of research units and studies registers around the world that are looking at this, but still what we're finding is that research outcomes are coming too slowly. And actually the majority of these initiatives still have a focus predominantly on congenital anomaly outcomes or children being born with birth defects. And so this leaves a really wide gap in our knowledge about the longer term outcomes for children exposed to anti-seizure medication in the womb. And by longer term outcomes, I mean, for example, knowing what the child's health status is as they age and go through into their adolescent years. Also understanding their developmental profile in infancy, but also through to their school-aged years and beyond. Knowing, for example, if a child may need extra help in school is really important information to feed back into the clinic. Knowing if children are at higher risk of developing clinical disorders such as autistic spectrum disorder or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder are also really important pieces of information that we need to know if there's an increased risk there, or equally know that these medications aren't associated with increased risks. So what's going on in the UK around this? Well, the UK has actually got a really long history of looking at these longer term outcomes. For example, the Liverpool and Manchester Neurodevelopment Group, in collaboration with colleagues in the US, really produced some fundamental research, which was very, very important and central to understanding the risks associated with one of the older anti-seizure medications, sodium valproate. More recently, the NAME study has been looking at women who are using lamotrigine, levetiracetam and other medications, and that research is going to be published soon and shows that in infancy there isn't an increased risk of children who are exposed to lamotrigine or levetiracetam showing poorer levels of development in infancy. We currently have the NAPE study, which is funded by Epilepsy Research UK and is looking at the impact of seizures during pregnancy on the developing child. And this is a study that was paused for nearly 18 months due to COVID, but actually we're up and running now and we're starting to see our families, and that's been really lovely to restart this year on a high, getting back involved with the participants for that study. And what's really important to recognise, particularly in this webinar, is the support of Epilepsy Research UK. You know, right back from the start of the Liverpool Manchester Neurodevelopment Group through to currently supporting the NAPE study, their support has facilitated a lot of work in this area. Their support has been fantastic, as that has from the hundreds and hundreds of families who have taken part in our studies over the years. And actually, we have no information to pass down to preconceptual counselling without families taking part and giving us their time and their information. And so we really, really, really are grateful for that. And they are brilliant collaborators in our research. So what are we doing now? What's ongoing in the UK at the moment? Well, the UK and Ireland Epilepsy and Pregnancy Register has run for many, many years, enrolling women during pregnancy and understanding the child outcomes at birth. I've been working with John Craig, Norma Delante and Jim Morrow, Beth Irwin and the team for a number of years. And finally, we're at a position now where we can extend the work that we do through that register a little bit. And I'll tell you a little bit now about what we've got planned. So whilst the register has been focused on congenital anomaly outcomes as their kind of focus, what we're looking to do is to extend this follow-up, extend the information that we collect to include childhood outcomes. And some very kind of early infrastructure building pilot work has been funded by the EU Innovative Medicines Initiative Study Conception. What this study is allowing us to do is to extend the UK and Ireland Epilepsy and Pregnancy Register, as well as other data collection systems around the world, to not just kind of collect that information at birth, but actually to start following up into childhood, allowing us to reach out to parents, to ask them to complete some questionnaires about their child's development at 6, at 12, and so on months. And the reason that we think this is really important is that actually this would be one of the first opportunities for us to routinely collect child health and neurodevelopmental outcomes. Typically, these studies have to wait for specific pots of funding or specific groups of researchers to be interested or to ask those questions. But what we want to do is to see this rolled out in the future. So we've built this infrastructure and we're doing a small pilot with the conception study, but actually what we now need to do now is to look at how we fund this system in the future. And our collaborative group are putting in a number of research applications around this. So what else is coming on the horizon? And obviously there is quite a lot, but actually I've just focused on two areas in this very short kind of space of time that we've got here. So the first thing is that actually there's not a lot of information available on the young people who have been affected by an anti-seizure medication exposure. So for example, sodium valproate. And so we are due to launch a study next month, which is asking for families to report to us how their young people are doing. So not just kind of the young children, but thinking about how children who are exposed to valproate get on in their teenage and even young adult years. And this has been a fantastic study that we're really excited to launch, not just because we've wanted to do it for a while, but also because we've worked really closely with a number of family-led charities on this. They've helped us pick the questions, they've kind of helped us build the infrastructure, they've sort of piloted it, they've told us kind of what they want, and hopefully we can deliver that. And I think where this is really, really important is to inform on the care and health pathways that these young people may need, so that we can do better when these young people come into health services. And the second piece of new research that I'd like to flag is we also need to make sure that we optimise preconception care. And we heard a lot from Kim about her kind of experience and the preconception care that she delivers. But actually what we want to do is to be able to make sure that it's standardised and it's optimised for all women, regardless of where they live in the country. And my absolutely extremely passionate colleague, Dr. Janine Winterbottom, is undertaking some work around this. They would like to hear not only from people with epilepsy, They would also like to hear from healthcare professionals to give their views on what good preconception care should be, what it should look like, and where its strengths should be. And if you're interested in taking part, please pause the video and take down the email address there. So in summary, there's a lot to kind of pack in, but there are efforts underway to improve the collection of data, particularly longer term child health and developmental outcome data, to be able to have that data that's required to feed back into preconception care, to allow people who are pregnant or who are planning a pregnancy, who are required to take anti-seizure medications, so that they and their doctors can optimize maternal health, and fetal health simultaneously. There's also projects that are starting looking at how we optimize that preconception care, how we get it right, how we get that information available to women in a very clear way. And also in development are studies regarding the longer term impact of valproate in the womb. And I'd just like to thank, our groups in Manchester and also at the UK and Ireland Epilepsy and Pregnancy Register, and all of you for your attention. And in particular, the families and the individuals affected by epilepsy who've raised money for Epilepsy Research UK. Your money has been central to us making pregnancy for people with epilepsy safer, and I thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and what a positive note to finish that presentation on, that everyone who's been involved has helped make pregnancy safer. And you spoke throughout the presentation, of the families and what they had added and contributed to the study as collaborators. I wonder if you could talk about the value of involving women with epilepsy and their families has really added to the studies.
Yeah, well, for number one, our studies are nothing without the families that take part. These women kind of meet our research nurses in clinic, they sort of read our information and they agree to be part of this journey with us. And, I'm very sincere when I say to the families that we don't have any data to pass back to you, if we don't have that kind of collaborative effort and that uptake from women. And so we're so grateful. So as well as being participants in research, we have a number of lived experience experts who help us design these studies, decide what questions we should ask next, feed into how we should ask these questions, right the way through to kind of the newsletters that we send at the end of our studies to feed back those results. And that has been absolutely excellent. And some of those kind of collaborations have started just accidentally by people that we've met. And actually that last year, your Research Roundtable, I met Norway, and me and her have been working together over the last year ever since. And so, it's amazing the kind of the collaborations with experts by experience you find along the way, and how they really just shape where you're kind of going with your research and how you do it. And it's brilliant. And if anyone else, hearing this is really interested, we're really keen to hear from people who can help shape this even further.
Of course, that's so brilliant to hear about people influencing and shaping the research throughout every point of the research. And we'll certainly share the details of the study that you've shared in the chat on Zoom and in the information below this video as well. And so the research that you've been working on, I wonder what the next steps are going to be, and how soon will we see a difference in the clinic and perhaps in policy as well?
So what we'd really like to do is to be able to fill this gap of evidence that we have, particularly for longer term outcomes. And whilst the Innovative Medicine Initiative Conception Study is helping us build that first step, that infrastructure and sort of a very early pilot, we can't roll it out until we've got funding. So our next step really is to be able to follow the families that enroll in the UK and Ireland Epilepsy and Pregnancy Register up routinely. And the routine bit is key there, because that means that every single pregnancy that is enrolled, we can follow up. We have information much faster. And so that will mean that, as our studies are going on, we can report all those different ages that you saw, making that information available as soon as possible. We don't want to wait until the children are sort of 10 years of age before we kind of look at how things are going. We want to know very early on, because we know we can probably pick up kind of signals that we need to act on much earlier. So by having this routine system, it will speed up the availability of evidence. And so that's kind of our primary next step, but also we don't want to stop there. Our sort of next step is, once we get this established in the UK and Ireland register, we want to kind of go to other international epilepsy and pregnancy registers and actually say, look, we can make this work within the UK and Ireland. We'd really like to do that. And that, I think, having that collaboration of a standardized approach will really help us look at rarer exposures or thinking about new medicines. So again, really bringing down the timeline that it takes to have that data available.
Mm-hmm. And the different patterns that you'll be able to see in that data will be able to then inform so much future research as well. And Rebecca, what do you think the unanswered questions are for women with epilepsy in pregnancy and elsewhere?
So when we kind of, obviously we see hundreds of women every year who we see them kind of at the point of enrollment when they're pregnant and once their children have been born. And so many women talk about, feeling anxious, about decision making for their health and their baby's health in pregnancy. And I think, therefore, one of the biggest questions is, are my medicines safe? We hear that time and time again. And so I think by being able to provide data on a routine and much more rapid basis will really help answer some of those questions that women have.
Brilliant. And so our final question that we ask all webinar participants is, what are your hopes for future research into epilepsy?
That's a really, really good one. I think my hopes are that we can do more and collaborate more. Those are probably the two biggest things that over the last few years we've seen really matter right across the board in epilepsy, whether it's the genetics of certain epilepsies right the way through to sort of this pregnancy type research, is that we're seeing these large networks develop, and they're really important because they are speeding up the generation of data. And so I think I'd really like to see more of that. I think I'd like to see these huge networks developing, where we're all doing the same sort of approach for pregnancy and epilepsy research, because then that data can be combined much more easily, and therefore we get to the end point, which is the answer, much, much quicker.
Of course. And the whole research area of epilepsy and pregnancy is such a collaborative sphere as well. So no better topic to learn from in that respect. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Rebecca. And if anyone is interested in hearing more, Rebecca has contributed to our research blog this month as well, and we'll be sharing the link to our blog in the chat below. So thanks so much, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Thank you so much again, Rebecca, for joining us last week. And last but certainly not least, we're going to hear from Kim Morley. Kim is an advanced clinical practitioner, nurse and midwife, and a pioneer of epilepsy specialist maternity services. Kim's going to share with us her experience of providing care to and advocating for women with epilepsy. So welcome, Kim.
Thank you very much, and thank you ever so much for inviting me today. It's a real pleasure, especially to be on with Faye and Rebecca, and also to be asked by Epilepsy Research. My career started 20 years ago after coming across a child who'd been exposed to sodium valproate, whose mum had very sadly died from sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. And I didn't know much about a syndrome that could be associated with the anti-seizure medicines. So I looked it up and found out there was very little information other than information about major congenital malformations. So I actually got a library book from our local library when I was doing reading time with the children, and at the back of it, it had, it was about epilepsy, and it had a support group called the National Fetal Anticonvulsant Support Group. And I contacted Linda Hamilton, who'd formed the support group, and asked her, could she let me know more about fetal anticonvulsant syndrome? And not only did she send me all the information about it and photographs of the children, she also sent me information about people who were looking at children who had been exposed to anti-seizure medicine. So I then in turn contacted all those health professionals and gathered all the research information and thought, well, I didn't know about it, so do any of my colleagues know about it? So I then asked around and nobody did seem to, and there was no service for women with epilepsy. So I thought, well, I need to do something about this. You know, if women aren't informed about the potential effects of anti-seizure medicines, and I was surprised even with, you know, in the neurology field, very little was being said about the potential effects of the medicines. And it isn't just valproate, it's the other medicines as well. And so after lecturing in quite a few different places, I then went to our head of midwifery and lead consultant and said, could I set up a service? And it was initially unfunded. And then I formed a registered charity through a woman who was so pleased with the care she received. She wanted to help me raise money. So then I raised money to pay myself by the Healthcare Trust to actually start a service for women with epilepsy. So that was the start of it. And it's massively expanded. And because of the experience I've had and the thousands of women I've seen and their families over the last 21 years, I've been able to be an expert both nationally and internationally and share my experiences. And I know Faye through the valproate stakeholders, and yes, Faye, it does take a lot of time what we do, but I think there's been so much progress over the years. And I'm really proud in my own healthcare trust that every single woman is on the valproate programme, who's on valproate. But I think in the end, what I'd like to see is that any woman taking any anti-seizure medicine is on some sort of register and annual recall, not just if there's an expert within that field in the area. What I'd like to do now is share a very short presentation with you, just to talk to you about what potentially is an epilepsy journey, and then preconception, pre-pregnancy, and then coming into pregnancy, if that's okay. Right, so even the first slide, you know, has some meaning, because it actually takes you, this isn't just something, one appointment that somebody needs. This is a journey that you do with people. And women are often introduced to me as young as 16, and then I'm with them during their journey to motherhood, which may not be for 20 years later. But of course, the journey is individual to the person I see. And your journey with epilepsy, a bit like Faye described, depends at what age you developed epilepsy, why you developed it, what your brain looks like, you know, is there any damage to the brain, who made the diagnosis, because that's pivotal in making sure that's correct. And then the treatment that's prescribed, because if you're already on an established treatment, it can be very difficult to transition off that treatment, especially as that involves surrendering your driving license. And also the support you had at the time and the way you feel about yourself with epilepsy, the type of seizures you have and the risks that can be associated with them and their frequency. And then not to forget lifestyle issues, because there's many other factors that can cause epilepsy to be unstable, but can also become problematic during pregnancy, such as smoking, alcohol abuse, all those sorts of things. And then comorbidities, you know, other conditions such as mental health issues and diabetes, you know, so you need to absolutely know that journey that that person's trod before you met them and what's happened since, and their educational status. So you're presenting the information in a format that they can understand. You'll see as well with this throughout this very short presentation, little pearls of information from women themselves. So during that pre-pregnancy care, it's imperative to have accurate contraception advice. And this all has to be evidence-based. It's a great opportunity to have your diagnosis and treatment reassessed. And if seizures not controlled, make sure you have joint care, so everybody is making sure they do their best to help you have reduced seizures. And optimal seizure control on the minimum amount of seizure medicine at a therapeutic dose, and a medicine that's less likely to cause adverse effects. And also to make sure women have evidence-based information about pregnancy and parenting before they actually embark on pregnancy. And then we have a growing smaller cohort of women who are actually on a pregnancy prevention program, because the only way they can sustain their seizure control, or it is their choice to stay on valproate, or it's a lifestyle thing at the time because they're at university and they want seizure control, and valproate is, is the only medicine that's provided that, but they sign up to a pregnancy prevention program and have regular reviews. Pre-pregnancy is a great opportunity to get fit, and I always talk to women about getting fit, making sure, eating a healthy diet, having support to stop smoking, to not just reduce alcohol, but to stop alcohol, to stop other medicines that potentially could cause harm, but also a good time to reassess women's mental health and their social health, because what would be worse if, that you were thinking about becoming pregnant, but actually your seizures were as such, if you became a mother, that could not just risk your life, it could risk the life of the baby. So it's about looking at all those aspects and making sure that women are aware of the risk if they should stop their medicine. So lots of risk awareness and prevention strategies during that time. And as I said, it's a journey. Sometimes during that journey, I will be seeing women every 3 to 6 months, but it's always a flexible approach. And then providing evidence-based care in pregnancy, making sure they get specialist expert care before, during and after pregnancy. And that goes on often, definitely for the pregnancy year, but of course women are often planning their next pregnancy, so being available for that. When women are pregnant, making sure they have urgent referral. So I like to know women are pregnant as quickly as their partners, and making sure they're seen within 2 weeks. And really that should be happening for the rest of the country too. And advocacy for those who are struggling to attend. So we do have women with some particularly difficult social circumstances, but we need to reach out and outreach to those women. And where possible, we try and make sure women don't sleep alone to reduce the risk of unwitnessed seizures from sleep, which can be a particular risk factor for sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. Try and address smoking if women are smoking, and also if they have an increased BMI, body mass index, because that can be linked with increased pregnancy complications. Faye already talked about vomiting, and vomiting can be one of the biggest causes of poor absorption with medicines. So always make sure women know about that before pregnancy, but in pregnancy, all the strategies to actually stop vomiting are very important that women know about that and know to see their GP urgently. Otherwise you risk them having seizures through poor absorption of the medicines. And then making sure you talk to them about medicines adherence, because we have noticed in pregnancy people's adherence with medicines tends to reduce as the pregnancy advances, and women do have fear about these medicines. That's why it's so important to share all the research evidence about the effects of these medicines, and we have a massive body of evidence now. Faye also talked about making sure her partner knew about first aid, and so I make sure the partner, family members all know what to do if a woman has a seizure, and we often put emergency management plans in place as well. And getting women to do their own risk assessments and talking to them about the Epilepsy and Pregnancy Register, giving them patient information sheet, and really encouraging them to actually register with the Pregnancy Register. And of course, being there to monitor their condition and treatment and well-being throughout the pregnancy. So I always think of myself as an add-on during the pregnancy. So I'm additional to the obstetrician and neurologist, the community midwife, sometimes the perinatal psychiatry team. I'm there as well, and often we'll be seeing women every 1 to 2 months. And then advice and information for women about labour, breastfeeding and caring for a baby. And a watchful eye for neuropsychiatric symptoms. We do know women with epilepsy have an increased risk of mental health conditions. And then helping women to self-monitor their own epilepsy, because they're the experts in their epilepsy. So if you give them all the tools to do that, they become the expert. and then making sure they have an anti-seizure medicine plan in place and that everybody knows about that plan. And it obviously needs changing every now and then, but making sure that people know what to do no matter where they are. And also learning from women themselves. My whole career has been moulded by women who are experts in their own condition, very similar to Faye, and taking away those caveats, those reminders that they tell us about, you know, if my partner needed the toilet, I made sure the midwife stayed with me. One woman used mindfulness. Setting reminders on mobile phones to make sure you take your medicines and doing your own risk assessment. And like Faye, I have a support group, a Facebook support group that I administer. It mostly runs itself now. It's in 26 countries, and I've just enrolled my 1,000th member. And being empowering women to evaluate their own risks. So after they've had their babies, you know, making sure they change baby nappy on the floor and think about fall alarms and never bathing baby alone, but not restricting what they do, but just making sure they do it safely. But there's lots of information also on my website, which is freely accessible. But thank you for letting me share that presentation.
Thank you so much, Kim, for joining us and speaking about your work in this area and also your journey to where you are now. And I thought one thing that you seemed to highlight in the presentation was the importance of evidence-based information, and that you're providing women and their families with information that is credible and from reliable sources. And I wondered if you wanted to comment on that at all.
Yes, I think it's very important. I think there was always, certainly when I started this, there was the attitude that why did women need to know all this information? And I would question it every time, that actually if I was taking a medicine that could potentially harm my unborn baby, I would want to know absolutely everything about it. And I never, if a woman has any problems actually understanding that information, I would explain it to them, but also give them the information in the format that I have. And, you know, having easy read information about important things like the potential effects of these medicines is pivotal as well. And I hope as the stakeholder, the valproate stakeholder information increases, that we'll have more and more information that's accessible to all groups in all languages, and that will be pivotal. I think it's been quite difficult for some health professionals, especially early on, to actually think that, oh, I'm the expert, and why would you want the woman to be the expert? But I really think that's turning around now. And I certainly have been a big driver of that, both nationally and internationally. So the latest thing I'm doing is trying to send all my knowledge and expertise and research evidence and use that for presentations in low-income countries. And so you can use your expertise and all that research that you've gathered to share, and then they can share it with their populations.
Thank you so much, Kim. And speaking of empowered and informed women, I'd like to bring Faye back in. We've had some questions that have been submitted by the audience, so it would be brilliant to ask you both some of the questions that we've had. And Faye, I'd like to speak with you. First of all, how has epilepsy interrupted your life?
The first and most obvious one is when you're first diagnosed. Obviously at 7, you've got absolutely no idea what's going on in your life. All you know is that you're different to your friends, and suddenly the grown-ups around you are treating you very differently. That was probably the first big shock to my system with it. I saw my seizures return while I was in my final year of university, and again that interrupted my life then. wasn't out partying as much as everyone else was as we were finishing off. And that's actually a really big thing. I think that's a big thing at that, and especially for those now who have missed so much due to COVID, like they want to be out with their friends and stuff, and it's such an important time in the life of young people with epilepsy. And then the biggest and most impact was when I fell pregnant with Noah. It's well documented, my seizures were uncontrolled, I had some pretty horrific experiences, and it meant that I actually had to leave my full-time employment. And for someone that had worked all of their adult life, that was a really, really big step. As Kim was saying, it's so important to empower women, and actually at that point I didn't feel it at all. And that was one of the reasons I was so glad that I found Kim on my journey, because she really was pushing to put me back in the driving seat.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Faye. And Kim, you spoke about the work that you've been doing, but you've also been involved in research as well. Would you like to speak about the research you've been involved in?
Yeah, so for my dissertation, for my master's in advanced clinical practice, I actually did some research on the toolkit, the maternity epilepsy toolkit that I designed. And basically, I use the toolkit as a navigation aid for people who don't have as much experience or knowledge about epilepsy. So I wanted to actually research how midwives were using that. Unfortunately, when I first put the proposal in, I was told this is not a doctorate and you've got to scale it down. So it was a much smaller study, but it was so valuable, and I was so grateful to the midwives who took part. And I looked at how they were using it, and whether it assisted them with their care for women with epilepsy. And there were quite a few findings with it that you can never take for granted that people have knowledge about epilepsy or really understand the implications that if somebody did vomit their medicines, that may affect their epilepsy, or that it was pivotal that people had first aid advice and gave that to the partners of these women. And of course, if the midwife was the first person seeing that woman, and nobody else had seen her, and they hadn't spoken about that, then the woman could have, come to serious harm, or worse, died as a result of not having that knowledge of what to do. And so that was a real eye-opener for me. But what was so wonderful is those precious midwives who took part in the study. They were so grateful for actually being involved, and they learned so much, and in turn they passed that on to their colleagues. And I also went on to get the study published, which I felt so good about. And even though I'd been a co-investigator in another study before, I'd never been a principal investigator in my own study. And this year I plan to write up a couple of retrospective studies on certainly my valproate audit, and also the care that I've given over the last 20 years. But I'm also hoping to be involved with further research with a big national project once again in pregnancy. So watch this space, really.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Faye. Sorry.
Don't worry.
Sorry, James. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kim. That sounds so exciting. We're so excited to see how this research will come out when it's finished. And you must have seen so much progress during your career in the care for women with epilepsy. And I wonder what has been perhaps the most poignant change.
Well, definitely the most poignant change is that the majority of women are well informed now. I would like to say the majority of healthcare professionals are, but certainly there has been some slowing of that during the pandemic. I think health professionals are becoming more aware. I am definitely, as a specialist in women with epilepsy, seeing a lot less babies actually having major congenital malformations. I am no longer seeing pregnancies on valproate unless I hear of somebody who's made an informed choice to remain on valproate, knowing all the risks. I know pregnancies are still occurring on valproate, and what I'd really like to see in the next couple of years is that massively decreasing. We can't stop at the end of the day women actually saying, no, I'm going to have a pregnancy despite what you say to me. But we certainly, by giving women the information about the potential harm and, you know, showing the fantastic resources from the INFACT group and OAKS group, which specialise in supporting women with children who've been affected by the different anti-seizure medicines. And yes, I guess what I've also noticed an improvement of is team working and collaboration, and that's been absolutely amazing, and an enthusiasm to actually start specialising in epilepsy, including my midwifery colleagues, you know, all over the country. And I really feel chuffed with that. You know, that is a real milestone, because having invented the word epilepsy specialist midwife and being a totally anomaly, you know, what is an epilepsy specialist midwife when I first became one, but now knowing that you know, being used much more often throughout the UK.
Thank you so much, Kim. And Faye, you were nodding enthusiastically when Kim was speaking about people working together collaboratively. Is that something that you've seen as well through the valproate stakeholders network?
I have, and it's such a nice change to see. I mean, even in my own care, I credit the fact that, you know, myself and Noah are here well and to tell our story on the fact that my neurologist worked alongside my obstetrician from the start, that I saw them at joint appointments. And it's something that I've spoken to Kim about at length that needs to be rolled out all over the country, to give women everything they need to have healthy, safe pregnancies, because ultimately that's what it's about. But yet at the stakeholder network, we are 100% starting to see that real teamwork coming together, and hopefully long may it continue.
Exactly. And so it's time for our final question of the webinar. And Faye, I wanted to ask you first, what are your hopes for future research?
Oh, I mean, for me, Rebecca's study was a huge one. I spoke about it in the written piece I did for you guys, the effect of the seizures on the baby in pregnancy. I'm looking forward to seeing that come about. In terms of research, I think I'm going to go for the big one that everyone wants. I want a cure. I want to see that we get to a point that actually epilepsy is no more. There's a way that we can live without it. Medication with less side effects would be a really big one for me, and it's something I see time and time again. People can cope with the fact that they're not having seizures and having to take these meds, but sometimes the side effects actually can be almost as debilitating, and that's quite a big thing. So I think that's something for me I'd like to see change. But I just think it's the hope of it all. You know, it just gives you so much hope. When I look back over the work that's been done over the last 7 years, I said earlier, I never imagined that we'd be where we are today. So 7 years from now, when I've got a teenager, where are we going to be with it then? You know, it's just the hope it gives. But yes, the ideal world, a cure, and yeah, meds with less side effects would be fantastic.
Thank you so much, Faye. Kim, what are your hopes for future research?
Well, my hopes for future research will really start with my beginning with actually research into the reduction of risks in women with epilepsy. That's not just risks to their own health, but that of their developing babies, and then subsequent follow-up of that. So the effects of the medication long-term on the developing child, and also the effects of epilepsy long-term and the seizure medicines on the women. Because we're already seeing with the older medicines, there can definitely be long-term impacts on cardiac health. And I think every woman should be followed up for the whole entity of their condition. And I think that should start from diagnosis and that research should run through with them. So a bit like the perspective register as it was, where it was collating information, this should be recruitment on a long-term thing, but this shouldn't be for a minority of women. This should be for every woman. The same as the fragmented care that currently exists, that shouldn't be so. Every woman should have equal opportunity to equal care and equal research. And of course, research, you have to consent to be involved, but there's many things that can be done that don't always require consent, where it can be monitored, the outcomes from each individual healthcare trust.
Well, thank you so much, Kim and Faye, for those really hopeful answers. And I think we're ending on such a positive note for this webinar. And so I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of our speakers today, to Kim and Rebecca for speaking about your clinical practice and your research, and a huge thank you to Faye for speaking about your own experiences and advocacy for other women with epilepsy and their families. Such important work. And all of our speakers today have also contributed to our research blog this month, so do visit the blog if you're interested to hear more. We'll be sharing the link to the blog and to the UK Epilepsy PSP survey in the chat box and in the information below this webinar. So thank you again to our speakers, to all of you for joining us today and watching this webinar, to Becca and James behind the scenes for ensuring that the webinar has gone smoothly. And we really, really look forward to welcoming you to the next webinar.